Welcome back to Too Young to Grieve. And today I'm joined by Sally Douglas, speaker, author, co host of Good Morning podcast, and someone who shares so openly about grief, which we love to see, and is just honest about grief in modern life and the modern world that we have to deal with. So, Sally, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Luke. It's lovely to be here.
No, I appreciate it. And I know we mentioned before how we tried to get this in the diary, and obviously you're in Oz, I'm in UK. So again, I appreciate you making the time, even being down under, and I'm excited to get your perspectives on everything.
It's I think I'm like 9 hours ahead of you here. So yeah, it's 6:30 p.m. for me, 9:30 a.m. for you. So we made it work.
Exactly. No, so am I. And honestly, I think it's so interesting. We were discussing it before, and I wanted to ask you about this and how it is different in Australia, like how grief is viewed or understood. What do you notice about that?
It's so interesting because I look at because obviously there's a real grief scene on Instagram, right? There's like a grief community, and the UK has got it going on. You guys are you've got such a good grief scene over there. There's like so many of you doing really cool things. And I always see on Instagram, like you and Amber from the Grief Gang and, everyone kind of doing their thing. And in Australia, it's definitely much smaller. Like I'd say in terms of podcasts, really, there's only Good Morning. And there's not much of a grief kind of community here. So I wish the UK was a little bit closer because I definitely want to be hopping on a plane and doing some collabs with you lot.
No, I agree. And we'd love to have you back here talking about it, but we'll make it work online. And in terms of like the grief scene, like you mentioned, do you feel like, because in the UK, I often think that, it's not spoken about enough and, there's not enough done or support with it all. So in Oz, would you say that it's potentially even less talked about or even less supported or understood in like workplaces, schools, whatever it is?
100%. Yeah. 100%. Like there's a really big grief charity in Australia called Griefline. And they ended up being absorbed recently by a mental health charity because they really struggled to get funding. Like grief is really like underserved here in Australia. Like a lot of workplaces, don't have adequate bereavement support. It's not really spoken about openly, like in schools. We're quite behind. There's a lot of work to be done here when it comes to normalizing grief and talking about it really openly.
Hmm. And how do you think, like with yourself and obviously Good Morning and speaking about grief a bit more, how have you found the sort of response, in particular, I guess from Australia? I'm sure you have listeners all over the world, but how have you found the response of people being like, this is something that we need more of, we need to see this more and things like that?
100%. Like the media have been really supportive and really embraced it. And like our listeners and community members, people love it. And I think because with Good Morning, like we always set out to just talk about it really openly, honestly, conversationally. We wanted it to be a conversation that was literally like the sort of thing that you talk to your mates down the pub about. Like we just didn't want it to be too medicalized or too proper. We just wanted to
Mhm.
really talk about it in a really relatable way, like warts and all. And I think people were just like, yes, we need this. So the reception's been really good. Yeah, like people love it. And I think because in Australia there isn't a lot of resources that talk about grief in this way, I think when people do find us, they're like, okay, yeah, totally get it.
Mm. I find that so interesting because I think that's something that I've realized since starting all this as well, is that I feel like grief is often, go see a counselor, go to therapy. And I always say, like, straight away, I don't know about yourself, but for me, when I was first going through it, I didn't want to go to counseling or therapy straight away because I didn't even know what day of the week it was, let alone know how to express what I'm feeling. So I think having these sort of, just like you say, like you're talking to a mate, just natural conversations, or go for a run, have a coffee and chat about it. Do you feel like these type of conversations is what really helps grief in particular, maybe at the start then?
100%. Like I remember when mum first died. So it was like November 2019. And I used to go to bed listening to Carrie Lloyd, her podcast, Griefcast. She's probably like the OG, isn't she? The queen of the grief podcasting world. And I used to go to bed listening to her podcast and like, oh, you know, like I'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, other people have gone through this, you know. Okay, I mean they were celebrities, but still, you know, it's like, oh, I'm not alone. And I think that's where there is so much power in, like, you know, grief podcasts, grief communities, like the work that you're doing, is that it's all about lived experience, right? And we're like, as humans, we're relational beings, you know, we need that connection, we need to be seen by others. And I think that talk therapy is great, but like in those very early, very, very raw moments, you just want to be seen by people who understand, right? And I think that's where there is such power in listening to podcasts, you know, sharing online, all of that is, it can really help you know that you're not alone, because it's really bloody isolating, isn't it, when you first go through it, even if you've got mates around you and support. I don't know how you found it, Luke, but I certainly was like, oh my God, like I know I've got people who care for me, but this still feels really, really lonely.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I even did a post on it the other day. I think the amount of support that my friend showed me was absolutely brilliant. But I always say that in grief, there's kind of a difference between being supported and feeling understood. And I think that's what made me sort of start this. And like I said, I listened to your podcast before, and those type of conversations and just hearing other people say, look, this is what I'm feeling. Like I saw your post recently on the physical effects, the high functioning effects of grief. And that's something that, you know, you don't think, why is this happening to me? And then you see someone talk about it and you're like, that makes complete sense now. And I think that's all we're really trying to do in grief, is just figure out what's actually going on. And hearing someone talk about it helps us feel a bit more like, okay, I am normal. This is part of grief. And I've just got to, you know, just keep moving forward day by day, one moment at a time. Just on that, like you said, like it feels isolating at times. You know, there's different things like I touched on that we experience in grief. What part of grief to you was like, no one prepared me for this? I didn't expect this at all.
I reckon like the physical symptoms, the physical side of grief, like, you know, when we see grief in popular culture, you know, there's normally a portrayal of people being like immobilized by sadness, you know, really emotional, really weepy. But God, no one prepared me for the absolute like physical exhaustion. Um, that really like surprised me. And also the anxiety, like my anxiety went through the roof. And it was something that I had to really work on. I think those like the fact that we grieve with our bodies as well as our minds, I had no idea, absolutely no idea, you know. I just thought of grief, I thought emotions, but you know, it impacts you like mentally, physically, socially, spiritually, like the whole shebang, right? It is. And I think that's what takes so many of us by surprise, because I don't know about you, but like you're aware that people are going to die, and then it happens and you're like, oh my gosh, this is all consuming, it's massive, it changes every part of your life, and it's bloody exhausting as well, you know. So that was a massive shock.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I said this maybe once or twice before, but it was the only time that I'd ever experienced a panic attack. I didn't even know what that consisted of. And then I was like, what is this? What is going on? And then you just, over time, obviously, like I say, through hearing podcasts, through seeing a bit more about grief, you're like, the physical effects are actually a lot of it that we don't really know about or get taught about, or it just happens, and you just have to figure it out yourself that this is like you say, all consuming. Do you think that people kind of think, I guess through what you might see in a film randomly, or you might hear about grief for what you do before it does happen? Do you think people just think it's just going to be you being sad and that's pretty much it, and the other stuff is nothing we've ever seen before?
I reckon, yeah. Like if you think about grief in popular culture, it generally is, they tend to drive the narrative of the emotions, don't they? But the rest of it doesn't really get a front row seat. And I wrote a post on my Instagram actually the other week. You just mentioned it, and I feel like I get a feeling that you might be the same as me, like that high functioning grief. Um, like when mum died, I was really surprised at how like I was able to like go back to work and crack on and, you know, meet deadlines and like organize things. And, you know, like I kind of took control of like all of the admin and was like, you know, firing through my spreadsheet and like keeping on top of stuff. And like I was really griefy in the evenings and like exhausted, but I also could show up without being griefy, if that makes sense. And like I found like that I really judged myself because I thought that I was supposed to be like, you know, really sad all the time and not able to like be practical or productive. And so I was like, oh, like, am I like just like doing this wrong? Or, you know, am I an emotional robot? And I feel like I get the sense that you might be like a bit of a productive griever as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think I've gone through different phases. I think at the start, my productiveness was social media and running and marathons and all this, and just putting the grief in something like, you know, I always say, keeping yourself busy. Like people say, just keep busy, just keep busy. And I think that was my idea of keeping busy. And over time, I think if you don't sort of understand the grief, feel the grief as people tell you to, it can be quite, like you say, high functioning. You're just sort of doing these things, and that's where the grief energy is going from. And I think over time, I'm sure you're the same, you know, where you've stepped back a little bit and you've been like feeling the grief and understanding it a bit more. And I would say it's so difficult at the start. And, you know, you don't really even think about doing those things. But over time, when you do get to a point where you can take a step back, can talk about it, can write about it, think about it, whatever it is, I think that helps a lot on the journey of grief for sure. But I'm definitely, yeah, in the same boat of high functioning, just keeping busy, doing things, probably still am. But yeah, definitely done a bit more work as well.
100%, 100%. And I think for some people, it's just the way that it processes and it moves through you. But yeah, that was another thing that surprised me, that I was more okay than I thought I would be at times, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point as well for people to hear, is that I think when we think, why am I okay? Like this event has happened. I shouldn't be okay, or I shouldn't feel joy at times, or I shouldn't feel happy at times. I should just be constantly sad. And I think that's the part that's quite difficult for us to understand as well, is that there will be times where you do just genuinely feel okay. And that is okay as well. It's just part of the grief. And, you know, there are going to be times where you just go through your day and you might not even think about the person. And I think we can feel quite guilty for that, but it is just part of grief and it's just part of the journey and getting used to it, I guess. So yeah, I do 100% agree with that as well.
Yeah, it's a weird one. I remember in the early days, like thinking like, would I ever have a day where I don't think about my mum all the time? And like, yeah, now I do. And but in the early days, you're like, what? No, it's never going to happen. But, and you can judge yourself for it. But I think it's, yeah, you just got to give yourself loads of grace, haven't you?
100%. Yeah, it's all about just allowing yourself to sort of feel these things and not judge yourself for it. And that can be so hard for especially someone at the start of their journey. Like I said, at the start, I didn't have a clue what day of the week it was, let alone feeling okay and understanding that it is okay to do that. But that kind of leads on to like what I wanted to ask you about in terms of the language and, you know, like what we use, the wording around grief and things, and how important you think that is about shaping how someone understands their grief as well. Because, you know, telling someone that it is okay to feel these things and, you know, normalizing it, how important do you think that is for someone understanding grief as well?
So important. Like words have so much power, don't they? And I think something that we talk about a lot on the pod and also in our book is like the power of just being really real with your language. Like I think when something happens, like something like a big grief happens, people really feel like they've got to show up and say something really poetic and sound almost like a Hallmark card, you know? Um, and actually just being really real and being like, mate, this is really shit and I'm really
Mhm.
sorry. Like, I absolutely fucking hate this is happening for you,
Mhm.
but I'm here for you, you know? I actually
Yeah.
think that can be quite a balm for grievers, because people tiptoe around you, right? And they might try and use this polite language, or they might even like say things that they think are well meaning but can be quite minimizing, like, you know, they're in a better place or they want you to be sad. things that we kind of hear like recycled a lot. So people just think, oh, that's an appropriate thing to say, but can actually feel quite dismissive. So I think just like the power of just being like, I see you, this is really bloody shit, and I'm here and we'll get through this together. And just, yeah, don't like not trying to dress it up. I think it's actually one of the best things that you can do.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we obviously at the start, like you say, we're looking for those quotes and those words that are going to make us feel better and understand it more and think, like, oh, this is just going to go at some point. And I think sometimes just, yeah, just like you say, just saying, okay, look, this is rubbish. It's not good. Whatever we say, this is not a nice experience. But yeah, I'm here for you. And that's one of the nicest things someone can say. And, checking in and just being there for someone. It's not like I always say, we don't need to be fixed, we just need someone there to just hear us out and just let us be whatever we're feeling at the time, just let us be. But do you think that sometimes like the wrong words, even trying to explain grief to someone, the wrong words could actually make someone feel a bit more lost rather than understood as we want to be?
I think so. Yeah. And I think that's where like having like a bit of a shared language can be really helpful. So like something that over time on the pod, like we sort of have come to like, I don't know, create these kind of terms like grief bombs. I don't know if you remember from like listening to the pod, like having a grief sesh, like, feeling like griefy as fuck. And like, I just find like that there are ways to kind of like make it a little bit easier to have those conversations by like making the kind of language around it a bit more kind of fun, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Like I'll
Yeah,
say to my
no.
husband, like I'm off, like, well, not, I don't say it anymore as much because it's been a while, but like back in the early days, I'd be like, I'm off, I'm going to have a grief sesh. And he would like understand what I meant, or he'd be like, oh, are you a bit griefy today? Like, yeah, I'm griefy AF. And like, it made it easier for us to like communicate.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's brilliant. I think just having those little words or little sayings that, just people around you understand so that they can sort of read the room and just be with you at that moment is brilliant because there are times where you will be feeling griefy and there are times where you will be feeling slightly better. And then, yeah, whatever mood or moment you're in, you can sort of adjust and people can adjust to that. So having your own little language around it, I think is brilliant because it just allows you to process it a little bit more and the people around you to help. Because I always say people do want to support people grieving, but I think we just never get taught about it or understand it. So it's quite hard to put those words or the right words for people. In
Yeah.
terms of that then, sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, it's like it's easier, isn't it, to like go into work and be like, oh, I'm feeling really griefy today, like, and you can say it in passing without it being a big deal. But like, if you try and put it in a way where it's like, oh, I'm really missing my mum or really missing my dad,
Mhm.
it makes it almost like it can feel a bit awkward to say. But if you just go, oh, I'm feeling really bloody griefy, like it just sort of makes it easier for you and them, I think, to kind of acknowledge it without it being like, okay, what do we do now?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's it. Like if you go into a workplace or with your friends and you say like, oh, I'm really missing my dad or your mum or sister, whoever it is, I think it obviously, people will be like, they freeze, they don't know what to say. Whereas if you're like, yeah, like I'm feeling a bit griefy or I'm feeling a bit, whatever it is, the word that you use, people will be like, oh, okay, like, do you want to talk about it? What do you want to talk about? How do you want to go about tonight type of thing? But yeah, if you just drop that, they just don't know what to say and they freeze. And it's like, we know what to say because we've been through it, but obviously they don't have a clue. So I think
Yes,
that's such an interesting part.
it's a right conversation ender, isn't it?
Exactly that. And it can be hard to like, because sometimes you don't know what to say to them as well. And I think that's the hardest part of grief is we often struggle at, describing what we're actually feeling. And that can make it difficult as well, I think. So it's it's a hard place to be grief, but it is a place that we can navigate. And like you said, even just there, at the start, you'd go out and you sound, going for a grief sesh or going to feel a bit griefy. And now, later down the line, you don't say that as much. And I think that's really positive for people to hear, especially at the start, because it shows that, yeah, over time, you still might have the moments, you still might have the sessions, but not as often, not as frequent. And that's really positive for people to hear, I think, as well.
100%. Yeah, definitely.
Just wanted to touch upon the friend side of things, and I think it's a really big part of grief, and I've seen it a lot, especially on social media recently. People talking about you'll lose friends in grief. People don't show up as you'd expect them, and like I said, a lot of my friends were very supportive, and I didn't experience too much of that. But there are, I guess, people who do not know what to say and find it easier to just disappear, I guess, and just not because they don't know what to say. How would you say that grief changes your friendships in ways that people don't expect?
There's it's like it can bring in a new season of friendships, I think.
Mhm.
Like people that you might expect to be there might not. And I remember one of our listeners actually said something, and it's always stayed with me. They we were doing an episode on grief and friendships, and they wrote in and said people can only meet you as deeply as they've met themselves, and that really stayed with me because
Mm,
I think some people just they do disappear, and it's not because they don't care. I think it's just because they just don't have the capacity.
mm,
Um, and some people, yeah, you might make friends with new people who end up becoming like your biggest support team. Like, I met Im and I didn't know her at all. And then we met
mhm,
at like a grief meetup, and then like the rest is history. And she became a central kind of part of my like grief journey, really. But I think it surprises a lot of people because you think you've got your like core set of mates who are going to be there thick and thin, and when people don't show up, how you want them to be, how you expect them to be, it it can be a real shock, and it can be really
mhm,
confusing because you think, but we're mates, like what's going on? And I think it's probably one of the biggest common experiences of grief. Would you agree?
Yeah, I see it a lot, and a lot of people in the posts that I do, and just on other posts, I see it. People talking about, oh, people haven't showed up for me, like they've after the funeral, like it all went quiet and things like that. And I think it is a very common part of grief, unfortunately. And like you say, I think that's a brilliant way to put it. What that listener said, because I think through grief myself, I'm sure you can relate that. Like I've got a lot deeper, a lot more open and a heavier heart and more empathetic for sure. And I think if you haven't experienced that yourself, or you find it hard to, get in touch with your emotions or be empathetic, and you have to deal with someone who's at that stage of life, it can be very difficult. And for that person, they might find it triggering for themselves and they might think, okay, I can't deal with this. I need to just take myself away. And yeah, obviously for the person grieving, that's very hard because it makes you think, what's wrong with me? Like, but there's nothing wrong with you. You've just experienced something very abnormal. So,
And it's really challenging, and I think like as you know as time goes on, in the early days, you're just trying to cope with the immediate like shock and all of the things that have to happen, and there's so much that happens in the first couple of months. But I think as time goes on, like it can be really helpful to like reframe it, not just that people haven't shown up for you, but also to think about it in a way that, well, what do I want from friends and relationships in my grief where I'm at now? Like, what would a supportive friend look like for me? What would that support circle look like? Like, maybe, rather than kind of coming at it from a like, people haven't shown up, maybe it's coming at it from a, well, I think I need some different people in my life as well. I think
mhm,
actually that there's maybe a new season of friendships and relationships that can support you better if the people that you thought were going to be there haven't shown up. And maybe it's actually time for like a rethink about the people that are going to really like nourish and support you. And I think that mindset can be a little bit more empowering as well, because you know it can feel quite isolating when people let you down, but also I think having that strength to know that you deserve good connections, and maybe looking for things that people with character traits and strengths that are going to really support you. It can give you that sense of like a little bit of a boost.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think I've seen that a lot in the sort of events and runs I was talking to you about that we're doing. You can see how people just instantly just get on and just get it and understand each other. And I think that's such an important part of grief is like you say, you met him at an event and now look what you've created. And it's just I think you just get that sort of vibe from a person who's been through grief or has experienced something similar, and you can just instantly relate. And I've been watching a series. I started it last night. It's absolutely brilliant, and the name has gone from my head, but I think it's called Shrinking. And one of the characters was saying how her friend, she's in high school, it's in America, and how her friend she doesn't relate to them. They're all going out, and she doesn't want that. And I think it explains it pretty well. And the series does explain it so well. How you just have different priorities after grief. And those priorities and characteristics and traits, like you said, is what could help you in your grief journey from someone else. And the friends that you thought would show up potentially don't have those. And yeah, over time, at the start, it might be like, wow, that's really hurtful. But over time, you'd be like, okay, actually, that's not the person that I need to help me in my journey, I guess. And just on that, why do you think it is so hard to relate to people who haven't experienced loss?
I think because it is all consuming, right? Like it changes every part of your life. And so when you're sort of around people who haven't been through that experience, you feel unseen because they can't really relate because they haven't been there, right? And so when you are talking to somebody who has been through grief and you can say like, oh, I'm absolutely exhausted today, I just feel like so griefy and so tired, and or like, oh, I actually feel all right today, is that weird? Like, oh, I haven't thought about my mum for a while, like, and they go, yeah, no, I totally get it. It just feels like you feel seen, right? And that really
Mhm.
matters because we're relational beings, we're humans, like we need that connection and to feel seen by others. So I feel like that's why it can be so hard when you're around friends who really support you, like, and they really care for you, but there is that sense of loneliness because feeling lonely, it's not about physically being alone, it's actually not feeling understood and seen. So I think that's kind of why a lot of people feel lonely and grief, even if they have like a lot of people around them. And just on the friends thing, actually, because this might really help your listeners, because it did actually really help me, and it's something that we talk about in our book. But um so like the philosopher Aristotle came up with this friendship theory, so I'm definitely not going to like lay claim to it, but we did like repackage it in our book and we called it the friendship buckets. But basically there are three types of friends. So you've got your like super like empathetic friend, who's going to be the one that's going to be sitting there with you like in the darkness, handing you the tissues, like the one that you can like really kind of rely on for that emotional support. And then you've got your friend who might not be so good at the emotional support, but is great if you want like to go out or, to do something social, or like, they'll organize something fun for you to do. But they're probably not going to be the person that's going to like let you cry on their shoulder. And then you've got the friend that maybe isn't very like good with the emotions, might not be your like, the person to take you out to cheer you up, but they're really practical and they might be like, give me a spreadsheet, let me at it, I'm going to help you organize everything. And so thinking about like the different like strengths and roles people play is also really good. If you're feeling like not all of your friends are showing up for you, maybe it you need to zoom out a little bit and think, okay, well, they haven't shown up for me, but they did actually help me with like the invite list for the funeral, or they did help me with like the dead min, or they did actually take me out for a night out and they did really make an effort. So I think that also, that perspective can be really helpful, because I think sometimes we do have a lot of expectations for everyone to be everything, and
Mhm.
unfortunately sometimes people just aren't able to show up in every single way that we want them to. And so I think that can actually take some of that pressure off some of the expectations we have of other people. But I also think it's so important in grief to put yourself out there, and it can feel really awkward, can't it, especially when you feel like you're just feeling griefy, and it's like you're exhausted and emotional, you don't feel like yourself. And And so the thought of like putting yourself out there can be super overwhelming. But like you said just now, like it's so powerful, the connection that you can have. Like, you know, you see it through your run clubs and through the meetups that you do. Like I had it when I met him. Like when you do surround yourself with people who get it, it's like so bloody refreshing, isn't it?
100%. And I see it, like you say, just naturally shoulders drop. You know, people can talk about things that they might not have had the opportunity to before because they know that, you know, the other person probably has been through a similar situation in a grief meetup or grief event more often than not. I don't think many people who haven't would turn up to something like that. But knowing that you're around people like that is just so freeing. And so even if people think, you know, if I go to this, it's going to be quite heavy, it probably most likely won't be for you. And you'll feel a lot lighter after it just because you've been able to get it out and speak about it. And that in itself is so freeing, like you said. And yeah, just going back to what you said about the different friends, I love that because I think I always say to some of my mates, we talk about it like, we all have different friends for different reasons. And I think that's exactly what you've obviously talked about, more related to grief, but just in general, you know, you might have a friend who, you know, you can call when you want to go out or do something, you know, go to the pub or whatever. Or you might have someone who is really sporty and you can call up and play paddle with. You might have someone who's just so emotionally intelligent that when you're feeling griefy, you can say, can we go for a coffee? I need to talk about this. And I think that's brilliant because, you know, like you said, it's hard for someone to be all of those in one. And it's hard to expect them to be that as well. So yeah, having those different avenues for you can be so useful in grief as well, because you know you've got someone to call on when you're feeling a certain wave of grief. And we know there's so many different waves. So yeah, that little friend bucket is really useful as well. And yeah, I just wanted to touch upon like the aspect where you said about spaces and, you know, grief events and grief spaces and going to things and putting yourself out there. Would you say that part of grief is also learning how to exist in spaces where people have no idea what you're carrying and you just show up?
100%. Yeah, that's a really good question, actually. And I don't know about you, but I definitely found like in the early days, I felt very self-conscious because I was very aware that I was grieving and I felt like I had this sign above my head, like grieving, you know, and like everyone else, if they know that you're grieving, then knows. And, you know, it's kind of like, it's sort of like quite awkward, but you do have to front up and learn how to like navigate situations where not everyone's going to get it, or but I think it's about having boundaries in those situations as well, like, and remembering that you are in control of like how much you talk about it and share, and like what you know, what information you give, or how much you go into detail about it if people ask, or you know, how much you talk about your loss. You do have control over that and you can set boundaries, because I think when we're feeling quite vulnerable, and we go into spaces where people might not necessarily know us that well or understand like what's happened, we can feel like we maybe have to like over explain ourselves or overcompensate. And so I think knowing that you don't have to do that if it doesn't feel right can feel quite empowering. But it's difficult, isn't it, when you know you're going into spaces where you feel like they're not grief friendly or people might not get it. Like it can feel quite intimidating,
Mhm.
but then also I think people can surprise you as well, because you know grief has 100% strike rate. Like, so most people when you open up may have experienced a loss or be supporting someone who is. So
Mhm.
I found like quite often in situations where I felt like it might not be a, you know, a grief kind of crew, or people might not understand, actually giving people the benefit of the doubt, people are mostly good, I think, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think that's a good point as well, because a lot of the time, whether someone has been through grief or not, they'll have a little bit of a human aspect to them and they'll be able to hopefully hold a little bit of space for you, or they might even open up about their own issues. And I think even that can be so helpful for someone because even if they haven't been through grief, they might have struggled with something like anxiety or depression or a mental health struggle. And knowing that they've experienced something like that, you know that they've been at a tough part of their life as well. And they can relate to you being at a tough part of your life. And just because they haven't lost someone doesn't mean they can't show up for you in a different way. And I think, yeah, having that sort of open mindset that, there are things that I go to and I don't really want to go to either. And sometimes I'd leave early or I don't want to be there. And other times, like you say, you might meet someone and you might have a brilliant conversation. You might make a new friend for your friend bucket. And, that's cool too. So, yeah, it can be hard, but yeah, I think over time you do become a bit more open to those things. And yeah, like not everyone that hasn't been through grief won't know how to hold it or experience it with you. And that's something that I think we find quite hard. We think, you don't get it, you don't understand this. And yeah, they might not understand it fully, but they might be a great support for you. And that's useful as well, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think there's power in like being vulnerable.
Mhm.
When you share your vulnerability, actually other people are encouraged to open up as well. And that's kind of where, connections can be made. But obviously you've got to pick your moments too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's another thing we kind of find hard. I saw someone actually speak about how apart from their favorite hobby, their second favorite hobby and their main hobby is grief and talking about grief. And we like to talk about it, we like to just express it. And yeah, I think that can be quite hard as well because it is, like you say, all consuming. So knowing that sometimes you talk about other things, you can do other things whilst having that constant in your mind could be a difficult thing to balance, I guess.
100%.
Do you think that people spend more time as well trying to kind of explain their grief rather than, just sitting with it at times?
Yeah, I think there can be an element of feeling like you've got to almost apologize for it um or rationalize it or make other people feel comfortable. I think it's a massive one, because we do live in a bit of a grief denying society in the Western world. So sometimes I think you can easily fall into a bit of a trap of like over explaining or overcompensating, which doesn't really serve you, but it can feel like you've got to kind of make other people feel okay with it.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. I think that is it. I think just because we don't really talk about it or get educated on it, you kind of feel like you have to explain what you're feeling to people who might not understand it. And yeah, you kind of feel like you have to justify what you're feeling at times and think, look, this is how I'm feeling. Like, I need to explain this to you. Whereas sometimes there can just be a power in just sitting with it and understanding it in yourself and letting other people maybe work out in their own time, I guess.
Yeah, and I think like just knowing you don't owe anyone your story, like you don't have to over
Hmm.
explain or accommodate to make other people feel uncomfortable about your grief, like
Hmm.
because I think that there is that element of feeling like if your grief doesn't feel like welcome in a space, like I think it's fine to put your needs first and not feel like you've got
Hmm.
to like make other people feel comfortable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I think, yeah, we often try and, like you said, if you drop, I've lost a parent, I've lost a sibling, can make people feel slightly uncomfortable. And we kind of think,
Have to
okay,
clear a room.
exactly. So we often just think, okay, like I need to justify this, I need to make it make sense to other people when really you don't have to, like you say, you don't know anyone, your story, you don't have to bring it up if you don't want to, and you don't have to share that if it doesn't feel right for you. You don't it's just part of your journey and not everyone needs to know that part if you don't think it's right to. Do you also think that people edit parts of their grief, let's say, even in their own minds because they don't feel acceptable?
I think so, definitely. Especially if you had like a traumatic or difficult loss, people might like censor parts of their story. And again, I think it comes to like boundaries, like only share what you're comfortable sharing. But I think people do tend to like edit things out to make other people feel comfortable as well.
Mhm. And do you think that it's part of it is trying to make sense of something that doesn't really make sense, to be honest?
I think so, yeah. I think part of it is maybe like a bit of self-preservation as well. Like, sometimes it can feel really difficult to like go, especially in the early days when maybe like you're seeing a lot of people who haven't, you haven't seen since the loss, and you have to kind of like maybe go through what's happened, and that can be quite exhausting, right? So I think there's like almost like a bit of power in sharing what you feel comfortable with, but I think we naturally probably tend to like select like parts that we kind of feel like we're able to talk about or we're willing to share, because it does bring a lot up if you're having to kind of like repeat your grief story like often, especially if like you're going back to work and like you're surrounded by a lot of colleagues or people who don't really know what's happened. So I think there's definitely like a bit of self-censorship that can happen, but I think sometimes that can be like maybe a bit, yeah, like self-protective as well.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think we do often try and protect ourselves in a situation that is quite, we don't really know what's going on. So we don't, yeah, we just want to basically protect ourselves and not think about it or feel it sometimes and make it make sense when a lot of it doesn't actually make sense. Like we discussed at the start, the physical parts and things like that, which we don't even understand ourselves or know is going to happen. So we just kind of keep it in and protect ourselves because we're dealing with so much already, essentially.
Absolutely. And it's so
Mhm.
confusing in the early days. And you've got so much to compete with, not only like processing the loss, but then, yeah, all of like the things on top, like the physical elements, then the social elements, like the friendships, and kind of trying to navigate, like, your relationships, like, and also like we talk about friendships, but a lot of like relationships, like families grieve differently.
Mhm.
I don't know what it was like for you, Luke, but like, did you find that you grieve like differently to your family, or were you kind of all on the same page? Because I've heard from so many people like that they found like they've just had completely different experiences to their families, and then that can be quite hard to navigate.
And I think that's such a crucial part to cover. And someone even asked me about that a few weeks ago. Like, I feel like I'm really sad still. This is what the person said. I feel like I'm quite sad still, but my siblings are, they seem all right, and I don't know how this is working. And I think that aspect of the family aspect of you're all grieving potentially the same person, but also different people. So like your parent might be grieving their partner. Your older brothers is the first child, or they're different situations. And I think for me, I think we were all dealing with our grief in different ways. And, everyone has their different ways of dealing with it and doing different things. Like I said, for me, it was running a lot and doing marathons and starting social media and just being that high functioning grief person, putting it all in. And then other members of the family do other things and deal with it in their own ways. And I think that's such a tricky part of grief because you're almost like, well, why are you doing that? Or why do you feel like that? And I don't. And it's again, I think that comparison can be so difficult because you're comparing your grief when it's different for everybody, no matter if you're related or not. So I think that's such an interesting point to cover, and it would be interesting to hear your perspective on it as well.
Yeah, so I think being in Australia, like, and away from my family after mum died, it was probably quite a different experience because it was just sort of me grieving with like my husband's obviously family, but he's not blood relation to my mum, and so he didn't have the same like depth of grief as I did. Um, so it was, yeah, it was a bit of a weird one. It was kind of like grieving like in isolation, like away from my support network. Had my friends here and stuff, but I guess I didn't have that close proximity to my family to be able to see kind of their grief play out, like, day to day. So it was probably a bit harder for me to measure in that sense. Um, but I think that, yeah, from what I've heard, like a lot of my friends that have experienced grief have like had very different um experiences to like their siblings say. Like one was maybe more of like the kind of high functioning griever, the other one was a bit more of the emotional. And I think it's finding like how to like navigate these new versions of yourself, right, that you haven't seen or
Mhm.
experienced before.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of grief is obviously that new version of yourself, that new identity that forms after grief is very difficult for you to understand yourself, let alone understand a family member who's also got that new version of themselves and is going to grieve in a different way. So you're trying to understand yourself better whilst also trying to understand your sibling or your parent better and think, well, why are they acting like that? Or why are they more emotional? Or why are they more high functioning? Why are they doing these things? And you just still don't know why you're doing these things. So there's so much to sort of understand in grief, like you said, relationships, friendships, family, the admin, all of these things at once that, you know, it's so hard to understand why someone you're so close with and potentially live with is behaving in that way to their grief. And yeah, it can be so confusing, I think, for someone who just doesn't get it yet.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. It's a journey.
Yeah, that's it. And it is a journey. And for people at the start, you know, if like family members are behaving different, it or not at the same stage or level of your grief, then it's okay. You know, they're just dealing with it in a different way. And it doesn't mean that they potentially didn't love the person as much as you because you're feeling it more and they're, you know, potentially looking okay. It just means they're at a different stage and, you know, you never know, they might not be okay. So yeah, it's just allowing them to experience their grief as their experience, I think. And just, as we said, with friends or friends with you, just being there and just allowing them to deal with it in their own way is so powerful as well.
It really, really is. Yeah. It is.
I love a quote. I'm quite open about it. I love a quote. I know we spoke about it before, but I like hearing new quotes and people's perspectives on grief. And like you said, everyone grieves differently. But one that I've only come across recently, I've probably seen it loads of times before, to be honest, but I only saw it recently again, is from Andrew Garfield. And he said that I hope this grief stays with me because it's all the unexpressed love that I didn't get to tell her. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's really beautiful, like, because grief is ultimately at the end of the day, it's love, isn't it? You know, the more that we love someone, the more we grieve for them. And so the depth of our grief is a reflection of the depth of our love. So I think that yeah, like that makes sense to me, right? Like, of course, like, yeah, it's a really beautiful way to put it. And I also love that you love a quote. I love own it.
I do. I've said it a couple of times before, and I've said it like I love a quote. I love putting them out there because, yeah, it's just always nice to hear what someone else thinks about grief. And I know we always say it, you know, grief is love with nowhere to go. But I think saying that, you know, I hope that it does stay with me because if it does go, then why has it gone? You know, that's love. I want that love within me from the person that I've lost. So I think it's interesting, you know, for people to hear that and might think, why would you hope that grief stays with you? Like, this is rubbish. Like, I hate it. But
Yeah.
I, I just think over time you understand it is just love, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think there's this like expectation that, you know, you're eventually healed and that you get over grief, and I don't know that we ever do get over grief and that we ever heal properly, because we're always, you know, going to miss the people that we love. And I don't think that um getting over grief is necessarily, you know, the best thing, because we always want to carry them with us. And you know, we learn to like integrate grief into our lives, and it's not as like immobilizing over time, you know, and you may not feel it all the time, but it's actually a reflection of the depth of the relationship that you have with them. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think if it was to go, I'd be like, why is it gone? Like, I love having that love within me because I can pass that on to other people. I can express it in different ways through creating different things or in my work or with a relationship with family. So I think, yeah, although it sounds a bit funny, and maybe at the start you might be thinking, why would you hope that something like this stays with you? It is just that love, and allowing yourself to feel that love at times can be hard, but it can also be so nice going forward because it's all the memories that you have sort of stored away, basically. So I found it really interesting to hear that side of things because I've heard grief is love, and we all know it is love a lot. But the fact that, someone would say, I hope that it stays was so interesting to me because, yeah, at the start, I could have never agreed with something like that. But now I'm like, yeah, I do. I do because I love that I still have that love there.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, you can still grieve someone and live fully and have a great life and feel like capable of living a full life. And you can still have grief for someone that you wish was there and that you love and that you miss, but it's not necessarily like a really negative thing. I think that like grief is often really, looked at upon as a negative thing. And yes, it's not like the greatest experience, is it? Like, like, but
Yeah.
it is also like over time, yeah, like there are elements of it that it plays a part in your life, and it's not it's not all doom and gloom, and you can go on to live fully after loss. And I think it's really important that people know that, like, don't shy away from when you hear quotes like that, don't think, oh my god, no, I don't want that, because actually you know it gets better over time, and yeah, like the love will always be there.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's such a big part of what you're trying to do, and what I'm also trying to portray is that, being a bit further along in the journey, we now have that perspective where, we love feeling the grief and living alongside it as well. And I think that's something that's so important. I want to keep getting it. It might sound repetitive, but keep getting it across that you can still live fully with that grief in your life. And yeah, it might sound hard at the start. How's that going to happen? But it can happen, and it will happen eventually. And when people say time heals and things like that, like I said, it never fully goes away, but time allows you to carry it alongside what you're still wanting to do and experience in life. And anything that you really wanted to do before, you can still do now. The grief will just be there alongside you, and that's fine. It's that person still with you, and that, I think that's a great way to look at it over time as well.
100%. Mic drop.
If I had a mic, I would drop it, but I don't. You can drop your one. But would you say, like, I think the time heals and all that side of things, I think it is difficult to understand at the start, and I didn't know what people meant by that as well. But would you say that part of the frustration with grief is that there isn't really anything to measure it or track it, and I don't think there ever will be. But would you say that's quite frustrating then, because you don't know, like, when is this going to get to this? Like, people talk about stages and things like that, but I think it's a load of nonsense. But the measuring and tracking side.
Well, yeah, because we live in an outcomes based society, don't we? Like, people we like live in a society where everything has been like everything's about being the most productive as possible, and we live in like a world of like instant gratification, right? We can get things like immediately, see results immediately, and so with grief, like, it's one of the things that it isn't, we can't control when people die, and then we can't also control, I mean, we can influence how we process the loss, but yeah, like, you don't know, like, there's no set, like, in 12 months time you're going to feel fine, and so I think because we live in a world where we're used to knowing the answer and knowing the outcome, it can feel really frustrating, and like, and also I think as humans it's hard to surrender, isn't it? It's hard to surrender and just go, I don't know what this journey is going to look like. I don't know how I'm going to feel in 12 months time. Like, and that can feel like when there's a loss of control, because we feel out of control when we've lost someone, and we can't control the events that happen to us, so needing to control the timeline can feel like, okay, well, I just need to know when I'm going to feel better because I need to feel like I've got some sense of agency in the world, you know. But it ain't the way it rolls, is it?
No. And I think that's such a good point. And even the word surrender, there's a creator, I don't know if you've heard of him, Higher Up Wellness. And he also lost his dad. And he talks a lot about surrender and, just at points realizing, look, this is out of my control. I can't really do anything. There's no, like you say, in 12 months, in 2 years, 3 years, that at this point you're going to feel this because everyone's on different timelines with their grief. People might, take a lot longer to get to a point where they can move forward with it. And someone, it might take them 1 month. And that's part of grief. And that's just how it is. There's no timeline, there's no measuring, there's no tracking. And that can be hard, I think. But like you said, just when you get to a point where you can just think, okay, this is out of my control. What I feel, I'll feel. And it might keep happening. It might soften. It will get lighter. But yeah, who knows when? It's just going to happen at some point, and that's fine. Just keep riding the waves one moment at a time, and it will happen.
It will. Do you know what? I feel like the anthem for this conversation is "Roll With It" by Oasis. That's a very good song, isn't it, for this convo that we're talking about? Oh, that's a really good question. I think, if I was honest, I think the thing about grief that still surprises me is probably how little we talk about it still. Like, even like 6 years into doing this, like, I'm like, come on, guys. We could be a little bit better. Come on, chop. And it just surprised me because I've been like interviewed on the radio and for different publications here in Oz, and journalists will say like, so tell us like about grief. What's grief like? And it's a real privilege to be interviewed, like, and I love it, but I also, it blows my mind because I'm like, why are you asking me? Like, it's been around for like since man, like this is not a new thing, and it's, so I think that still surprises me about grief, like those kind of questions.
I think that's so interesting. I think I can agree with that as well. I'd say the support and understanding of grief is just something that still, like say, blows my mind as well. Unless you're one of the luckiest people around, we're all going to experience grief at some point in our lives. And I think how we don't talk about it and prepare people for it. And, like there's things I wish I'd done before. Obviously, I don't regret anything in life, but there's things I'd wish I'd said or asked. And because we don't speak about it, we don't really, think about it. And I think it's crazy that, we just don't. And it's still something that people are like, what does that actually feel like? Like, that's really interesting. And it's like, we should talk about this. We should know because you might have a friend or a colleague or someone you're working with that's been through this, and you just think they're okay now because, the funeral's done. It's been 2 weeks. They're back to normal. But as we always say, there is a whole new normal for us now after grief. So it blows my mind, honestly. And I agree with that completely.
Yeah, it is wild. It's bananas. We're getting there though, like slowly but surely. Conversations like this, let's just keep trying to move the dial. We'll get there eventually.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. The more we speak about it, the more that people hear about it and think, okay, actually, yeah, we should maybe know a bit more about this or do a bit more about this. So, yeah, we just keep talking about grief as much as people probably think we're weird for it. And yeah, we'll hopefully get somewhere someday. But if not, the people that are listening, you feel understood, and that's the main thing. So, there are people that do get it, and that's what we want to put across as well. Sally, honestly, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Could talk for hours and have so many more questions, but I only have one more for you to finish the episode. And it's the typical Too Young to Grieve podcast question. But if someone feels like their life has changed in ways that they don't really understand after loss, what is one thing that you'd want them to know?
That it's okay to change, and that when life changes, it can feel really scary, but you will be okay, and you will make this. You will make it through, and just one step at a time.
Mhm. Perfect. That's it. Just one step at a time. And like you said, we try and roll with it. It's not something that we wanted, but we just got to roll with it and see how it goes one day at a time, one moment at a time. Thank you, Sally, honestly, so much for your perspectives. Again, thank you for everything that you've done for grief, and you've helped me, and I'm sure you've helped so many others. And for anyone who's maybe just hearing your voice for the first time today, where can they find everything that you do?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to like finally connect properly with you, and like good on you for doing what you're doing as well, because it's really important, and we need more male space voices in the grief space. So I love what you're doing, and I love that you asked me to come on. You can find Good Morning like any podcast platform. Just type in Good Morning. It's Morning with a U. I'm on Instagram at Sally Douglas Grief and Good Morning Podcast. So, and our book is available on Amazon and anywhere that you type in Good Morning Book, you should find it.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And if you haven't, check out Sally. Good morning. Everything they do is brilliant. So, yeah, thank you again, Sally. And see you on the next episode of Too Young to Grieve.